He needed someone to cook for the logging crew. She needed a place where no one knew her name. The advertisement in the Spokane Falls newspaper was 3 lines long. It said, "Cook wanted for logging camp, 40 miles east of town. Room and board provided. Wages fair. Inquire at the Morrison Timber Company office on Front Street." It did not say that the camp was accessible only by a wagon road that turned to mud every time it rained. It did not say that the logging crew consisted of 11 men who had been eating their own cooking for 6 weeks and whose collective culinary skill extended to boiling coffee and burning beans. It did not say that the previous cook had quit after a dispute with a crosscut saw that the saw had won. The advertisement was, in the way of advertisements, optimistic in its omissions. It promised fair wages and room and board, which were the facts it could afford to share, and it concealed the isolation and the mud and the particular loneliness of a camp where the nearest town was a full day's ride, which were the facts that would have discouraged any applicant who had options. Colette Marchetti read the advertisement on a Tuesday morning in April of 1889, sitting on a bench outside the newspaper office with a carpet bag between her feet and a bruise on her left cheekbone that she had covered with powder and that the powder did not entirely conceal. She was 25. She had arrived in Spokane Falls 3 days earlier on a train from Portland, and before Portland she had been in San Francisco, and before San Francisco she had been in Sacramento, and the geography of her recent life was the geography of a woman moving away from something, rather than toward anything. Each city a little farther from the last, each departure a little more urgent than the one before. She had changed trains twice between Sacramento and Portland, paying cash so there would be no record, sitting in coaches rather than sleeping cars so there would be no name on a berth assignment, reading newspapers she did not care about so she would not have to meet the eyes of strangers who might remember her face. The something she was moving away from was her husband, whose name was Vincent Marchetti, and who was, by the assessment of everyone who knew him socially, a charming and successful man, and who was, by the assessment of everyone who knew him privately, which was only Colette, a man whose charm operated on a cycle that began with generosity and ended with his hands, and that repeated with the regularity of weather. The cycle lasted roughly 6 weeks. The generosity phase involved flowers and apologies, and the particular tenderness of a man who is sorry for what he has done, and who believes, each time, that the sorrow is permanent. The other phase involved doors that slammed and words that cut, and hands that left marks in places that clothing could cover. She had left Sacramento with a carpet bag, and the clothes she was wearing and $42 she had saved by hiding coins in the lining of a winter coat he never wore. She had not filed for divorce because divorce required an address and a court appearance and a public record. And each of those things was a thread that Vincent could pull to find her. And Colette had learned that Vincent always pulled every thread. She needed a place where no one knew her name. 40 miles east of Spokane Falls, at the end of a mud road, in a logging camp full of men who would not ask questions, because men in logging camps understood that questions about the past were impolite. That was a place where no one would know her name. She tore the advertisement from the board, folded it, and put it in the pocket of her traveling dress. And then she walked 6 blocks north to the Morrison Timber Company office on Front Street, walking quickly, because a woman who is being hunted does not dawdle, not even when the hunter is 1,000 miles away. The office was a single room with a desk and a stove, and a man behind the desk who looked like he had been carved from the same timber his company harvested, broad, weathered, and functional without being decorative. His name was Holt Morrison. He was 34, the owner and operator of a logging outfit that employed 11 men, and that cut Douglas fir on a timber lease in the mountains east of town, and that was, at the moment, in danger of losing half its crew, because the men were threatening to quit if they had to eat one more meal cooked by Jankowski, whose beans were a crime against digestion, and whose coffee could strip varnish from a table. Holt looked at Colette. He saw a small woman in a traveling dress that had been good once, and that had been worn too many days in a row. He saw the powder on her cheekbone and what the powder was covering. He did not ask about it because Holt Morrison was a man who understood that some questions are not his to ask, and that the answers, if they came, would come in their own time and on their own terms. "Can you cook?" he asked. "I can cook." For 12 men, 3 meals a day. The kitchen is a shed with a wood stove and a work table. Supplies come up by wagon once a week. I have cooked for more with less. The pay is $15 a month plus room and board. The room is a cabin at the edge of camp. It has a door that locks. He said the last part, about the door that locks, without emphasis, as though it were a detail about the plumbing or the stove. But the way he said it made Colette understand that he had seen the powder and what was underneath, and that the lockable door was not an amenity, but a promise. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. The supply wagon leaves at dawn. The wagon road was everything the advertisement had not mentioned. It climbed through timber and mud, and switchbacks that made the mules complain, and that made Colette hold the seat rail with both hands, and that took 7 hours to cover 40 miles. The camp, when they reached it in the late afternoon with the shadows already long between the trunks, was a clearing in the Douglas fir, with a bunkhouse and a mess shed, and a saw pit, and a stable, and the small cabin at the edge of the clearing that Holt had described, which had a door that locked and a window that looked out on the trees, and a bed with a mattress that was better than the bench in Spokane Falls, by a considerable margin. The crew regarded her with the particular wariness of men who have been living without female company, and who are uncertain of the protocols. They were rough men, loggers, sawyers, teamsters, with rough hands and rough manners, and rough language that they moderated in her presence, with varying degrees of success. They called her ma'am. They removed their hats at meals. They did not ask where she came from, or why a woman who spoke with a slight Italian accent, and who moved with the careful economy of someone accustomed to avoiding sudden movements, had ended up cooking for a logging camp at the end of a mud road in eastern Washington. Colette cooked. She cooked the way a person works who needs the work to be more than work, who needs it to be structure and purpose, and a reason to get up in the morning that does not involve fear. She made biscuits from scratch, and stew that had flavor, and coffee that was strong, but not punitive. She made pies from canned fruit and dried apples and bread that rose properly, and roasts that were seasoned and timed and served hot. The crew, who had been subsisting on Jankowski's culinary atrocities for 6 weeks, ate her food with the reverence of men who have been in the wilderness, and have found civilization in the form of a properly made biscuit. Holt noticed. He noticed the food, which was excellent, and he noticed the way the crew's morale improved, which was measurable in their daily output and their willingness to stay. And he noticed Colette herself, who was quiet and competent, and who kept to her cabin in the evenings, and who flinched when doors closed too loudly, a flinch so small and so quickly controlled that most people would not have seen it. But Holt saw it, because Holt was a man who paid attention to the things that mattered, and who understood that the things that matter are often the things that people try hardest to hide. He began finding reasons to be near the mess shed. He brought firewood for the cook stove without being asked. He repaired a shelf that was pulling away from the wall. He built a small table for her cabin so she would have a place to sit in the evenings that was not the bed. He did these things without announcement or expectation, arriving early and leaving without lingering, the way a man does things when he is trying to make a space safer for someone, without making the someone feel that the safety is conditional on anything. He never stood too close. He never raised his voice, even when the crew frustrated him, because he understood that a raised voice in the presence of a woman who flinches at loud noises is not just a raised voice, but a weapon, regardless of who it is aimed at. 3 weeks after her arrival, a letter came with the supply wagon. It was addressed to the Morrison Timber Company, and it was from a man in Portland who described himself as a private investigator, acting on behalf of a client in Sacramento who was searching for his wife, who had disappeared 6 months ago, and who was described as 25, dark-haired, petite, with an Italian surname. The letter asked if anyone matching that description had been seen in the area. It asked politely. It included a return address. Holt read the letter in his office. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the stove and watched it burn. And when the ashes were cold, he went to the mess shed, where Colette was preparing the evening meal, and he stood in the doorway and he said, "No one is coming here who is not welcome, and no one who is welcome will be asked to leave." Colette looked at him. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been running and who has been found, not by the person she was running from, but by a person she can stop running with. What did the letter say? There was no letter. It was the right answer. It was the answer she had needed from someone for 6 months, and that no one had given her, because no one had known to give it. It was the only answer. It was the answer of a man who understood that the truth is not always the fact, and that sometimes the truest thing you can say is the thing that protects the person standing in front of you from the fact that would destroy the safety you have spent 3 weeks building. The camp operated on cycles: cut and haul and mill, cut and haul and mill, and Colette's kitchen operated on its own cycle of breakfast and dinner and supper, and the cleaning and preparation between. And somewhere in the intersection of those cycles, in the mornings when Holt brought wood, and the evenings when he lingered after the crew had eaten, a second thing began to operate, quieter than the saws and steadier than the seasons. A thing that neither of them named because naming it felt fragile, like a new shelf that has not yet been tested with weight, and because naming it would require acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would require deciding what to do about it, and deciding what to do about it was complicated by the fact that Colette was still, legally, married to a man who was looking for her. Holt proposed in June. He proposed in the mess shed, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse, while Colette was wiping down the work table. He said, "I know it is complicated. I know there are legal questions, but I would like you to stay, not as the cook, but as my wife. And if the legal questions need answering, I will pay for the attorney, and if anyone comes asking, I will stand between you and the asking." Colette put down the rag she was holding. The mess shed was quiet. Outside, the trees were black against a sky that still held the last light of the longest days of the year. And somewhere in the timber, an owl was calling, and the sound was the loneliest and the most peaceful sound she had heard in years. She looked at this man who had given her a door that locked and a table to sit at, and a letter that burned, and a space where no one asked questions, and where the only thing that was expected of her was the thing she was good at, which was feeding people, and which was also, she understood now, a way of caring for people, which was something she had always wanted to do, and which had been taken from her by a man who confused possession with devotion and control with care. "The legal questions will take time," she said. "I have time. The trees take 60 years to grow. I can wait for the law." They married in the fall, after a Spokane Falls attorney had filed the papers, and after the papers had made their way through the courts, and after the courts had granted the divorce, on grounds that the attorney described in language that was clinical, and that Colette recognized as a polite summary of the worst years of her life. The crew attended the ceremony, all 11 of them scrubbed and shaved and wearing their cleanest shirts, which was held in the clearing between the mess shed and the cabin, under a sky that was the particular blue of a Washington autumn, and Jankowski, who had been relieved of his cooking duties months ago, and who bore no grudge because his beans truly had been terrible, gave a toast that was sincere, if grammatically uncertain. The cabin at the edge of the clearing became their home. Holt built an addition in the spring, a proper kitchen, because the mess shed was for the crew, but the kitchen was for them, and a man who builds things for a living should build the best things for the person he loves. He used cedar for the walls because it smelled clean and lasted forever, and he hung the door on iron hinges that he forged himself, and the door had a lock, because every door he built for her would have a lock, not because she needed it, but because the choice to use it or not was hers. Colette cooked in both kitchens, the one for the crew, and the one for the two of them, and the difference between the two kitchens was the difference between work and home, which is the difference between feeding people and nourishing them. No one came asking. The letter that had burned in the stove was the last anyone heard from Vincent Marchetti, who had presumably found someone else to charm and to cycle through his generosities and his rages. Colette did not wonder about him. She did not need to. She had a door that locked and a man who would never give her reason to use the lock. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.